We're going to pivot over now to Dan Bowden and Jim Routh, if they can join us. And I believe Jim's actually in person. So, Jim, good to see you. Dan?
Good to see you. I'm secured here in Paradise in Naples, Florida. So it also happens to be my home. So.
All right. Well, very good. So Dan's an active CISO, and I've worked with Dan probably, I don't know, how long ago was it? 15 years now? 16 years? And he's a CISO for Centera Healthcare, and prior to that, CISO for University of Utah Healthcare Systems. So Dan, welcome.
Thank you.
Yeah, from Salt Lake today, right?
I am.
And Jim, you're showing us the good life that is available to those who do a good job in their career after you retire as CISO, right? So you're on the beach in Florida.
I am, and it's a lot better than I expected, and I had high expectations.
All right. Well, awesome. Well, thanks for taking some time today. Dan and Jim and I have actually been talking about this supply chain risk since shortly after the SolarWinds breach event. And, I was calling them to just get oriented myself. Jim, starting with you, when we talked shortly after the SolarWinds Orion breach event, you said this was a tectonic shift. You said two things that really stood out to me. One, this is a tectonic shift for us in the industry. And two, you also expressed confidence. We've got this. Will you expand on those two things a bit for us?
Sure. It takes a little bit of teasing out, but essentially there are two things going on here. Anytime you have a major incident, the most important part of the incident is harvesting the lessons learned. And there are three fundamental lessons learned that we can apply from SolarWinds. But the tectonic shift aspect actually goes back to June 2017. And all of the Health ISAC community was part of understanding what happened with NotPetya, and that in turn was a supply chain poisoning that had massive business disruption causing billions of dollars of impact initiated by a nation state. So fast forward to 2020, and SolarWinds is the same thing. Now, it's time now for true confessions. So I was a CISO in 2017. I was a CISO in 2020. I did not apply the lessons learned from the NotPetya breach effectively, and the reminder came in SolarWinds. So there's three lessons learned that have to be applied, and two of the three we know how to do really well. And so we don't need new technology, we don't need new funding, we just need to apply controls effectively using the capabilities that we have for those two. The third one requires a little bit more innovation in the technology side, and I'll get into that, but let's start with number one. Number one, whatever code repository is in use in the enterprise, whether it's GitHub, GitLab, or Bitbucket, all three have 2FA that you can implement. You just have to mandate that as a requirement, and you have to make sure the passwords that are registered are complex. We know how to do that. That's step one. Step two, we have third-party governance programs in place today in our enterprises. We need to look at code repo management as a subset of SaaS service that is part of our third-party governance program, and we need to use real-time access to vulnerability information for the repos that are in use in our enterprise. So make it formally part of the third-party governance program, apply the controls that we all know how to use. And if you're not sure where to get real-time vulnerability information, ask Kelly, he might be able to help you with that. So those are the first two lessons learned. The third one is a little bit challenging in that it's a more emerging technology. There's a category of technology called workload runtime protection. And it's essentially using machine learning algorithms to monitor application behavior, alert you if that behavior changes, or just block that potential behavior change, and you can embed that into your repos and ultimately into all of your workloads, whether they're in the cloud or on-prem or both. That's technology that we have to get comfortable with, and we have to work through that a little bit, but we should start on all three of those lessons learned today. Don't let another major supply chain poisoning remind us that we haven't applied those three lessons learned. Let's all as an industry focus on the implementation of those three things, and the resiliency across the health sector will rise.
Right on. Thanks, Jim. So just to your last on the workload runtime protection, for example, you look at CodeCov or SolarWinds, we saw in both cases that software behaving differently at a certain point in time, and it suddenly started calling out to systems that it had never done. So that workload runtime protection is something that specifically addresses that, learning the behavior and then alerting or blocking when it sees that change?
That's exactly right. And so you start out using it in the alert mode, and when you as an enterprise feel comfortable, then you turn it into blocking mode. And that's your backstop. So if your previous controls were not effective enough in preventing a supply chain poisoning attack, then this is your backstop.
Dan, I'm going to go a little bit off script here on the prepared questions, and I'm curious to hear from you. What questions are you getting? What's the conversation inside your organization, and what conversations are you having with CISOs that you're getting? What's kind of that conversation, CISO to CISO, and what's the conversation with the board and the CEO and CIO about this supply chain risk that we're facing?
It's interesting. With the health provider organization, COVID was a huge supply chain wake-up call. A year ago, or 14 months ago right now, the supply chain concerns were about ventilators and masks and gloves and gowns, and why aren't more of these produced in the United States, and why are we waiting for them to come from overseas? And then we sent a whole bunch of people home. And within our facilities, well, how do we preserve masks and gowns and gloves? Well, let's do telehealth from the patient room to the hallway or to the nurse's station. So iPads, well, where do we get these? Where do we get laptops? How do we get people home? And crunching more cloud resources for Windows Virtual Desktop. And we started looking at things in a much different way. And what the benefit that came out of it was our organization really just grabbed control governance-wise and started asking a lot more hard questions, because we learned it wasn't just us getting firsthand, what do we need, but that downstream, our suppliers are waiting on suppliers. And those people are now going through all the same things. They're sending people home to work. And so there was this incredible disruption. And in your mind, as a CISO, the challenges that are happening now when people are having to be trained on a different way to work, go home and do this. And at first it was just, where do I find a secure link and explain how Duo works again, right? It was the first 2 weeks, there were hundreds of calls just reminding people, that if you want to get on the network, this is how you do it. But it evolved into a much more challenging situation. And what we learned is the business now is engaging at a much deeper level and asking me. So that's what I really enjoy is I'm being asked questions now in the past 12 months. I wasn't asked in the previous three years I was here. And, I got a great call the other day. Hey, Dan, 2 of our hospitals outsource this lab service to this one company who outsources their billing to this company who outsources analytics to this company. Can you walk us through that? Because they need to sign an attestation about how data is accessed. And so that's, I think that's what's happened. What, the last 12 months has happened that's been different in that review process is a lot more engagement. We now have a vendor, an enterprise level vendor risk management project going on. an enterprise level contract lifecycle management project going on. I'm not driving these. That's what's awesome. I'm just a stakeholder. I get to participate.
Right.
And I think when you're a CISO, that's a huge relief when you're not the one trying to push that ball.
So do you see the business cutting apart the supply chain more closely?
It's interesting. I don't know if cutting it apart is the right way as much as more tightly governing.
Yeah.
They want to know if this stops, what's the impact?
Yeah.
And then what's the likelihood of it stopping?
Yeah.
And that's what I like when you're talking with Keith is that likelihood and impact. If this stops right now, what happens to us?
Yeah.
Is it a patient safety concern? Is it a revenue concern? Is it some other concern? And then what's the next plan? And do we build immediate resilience, or do we have some sort of a stopgap business continuity plan? And it's been interesting.
So, quick question for both you, Dan, and Jim. We actually recently had an interesting back and forth on what is the number one for healthcare providers, active patient providers, not maybe the insurance company, but what is, what's the number one, what's the spot in that supply chain that if that went down, that would have the biggest impact on the U.S. healthcare industry?
I don't know if Jim was going to go first. I think for us, it's just the ability to contact. That's what we learned early on. That patient portal, telehealth, you've got to have that. And there's a health system that's undergone a serious ransomware event in the past week or two. And just what I glean looking as an outsider, from a long ways away, it looks like the biggest concern I see are patients saying, when's my appointment? When's this getting rescheduled to? When are you going to see me again? Yeah. And so we really thought a lot about those patient portals. Even if the news isn't good, we've got to have fresh news. I mean, you got to tell them today, every day. Every time they call, what's going on? What's your status? Make them know we're still in touch and we're still thinking about you and trying to prioritize how we deliver service. But that's my view of just watching a few things last year or so.
Yeah,
Jim,
Kelly, I think I'm going to go second Dan's perspective. I think communications is absolutely essential, and I think it's actually becoming more essential, largely because the dependency on third parties and other drugs and services and products to support healthcare is so complex, and certainly in large enterprises, but even smaller enterprises. And I'm going to take an opportunity just to tip my hat off to Dan and all of his colleagues that are CISOs in health providers today. What I learned in my experience with Health ISAC is that in the health provider space, the diversity of technology that it has to be dealt with in a provider setting is far more significant than other industries. And yet, the resources available for cybersecurity risk management are significantly less than other industries. And that discongruence, if you will, of those two things not being aligned, I tip my hat to any CISO in the health provider space today. You do a remarkable job given the challenges that you face. And I'm sure you rely heavily on information shared through the Health ISAC, but you deserve kudos.
Thank you. On behalf of all of us, a big thank you. Appreciate that.
Question for you, Jim. There's been a lot of, this digital supply chain, and then the threat that's always pressing of ransomware. Has that dramatically changed the risk aperture that organizations are having to pay attention to, whereas before maybe they were data focused, and now if you're looking at business resilience and availability, does the risk aperture have to change? Is that something that we got wrong and that we're having to adjust to, having risk concern about a much broader spectrum than we might have previously?
So I think the attack surface has changed, but I don't think we necessarily got it wrong. I think what's happened is that ransomware has focused on the middle tier and smaller organizations, given their lack of ability to provide advanced endpoint protection. And that's been the sweet spot for ransomware for several years. I think what's happened with the evolution of ransomware as a service is that ransomware as a service capability can deal with larger organizations. And so that's one dynamic that's happening from the threat actor side. The other dynamic that's happening from the cybersecurity insurance side is that more policies are covering the payment of the ransom as part of the benefit after an incident. And that's creating a financial incentive for two things. One, for the victim enterprise to consider paying the ransom as the fastest way to resilience, and the threat actor as broadening their target market to increase because the probability is that they're going to get paid that ransom. And those things are systemic changes that really hurt the enterprise in the long term. So my recommendation for enterprises is to recognize for the past 15 years, we've spent money, time, and effort to speed up our data replication processes and our storage management capabilities across the enterprise, and we've had tremendous positive outcomes as a result of that investment. However, that investment actually increases the vulnerability of the business impact associated with a ransomware attack. So if it's a data destructive event, it's now replicating faster in our enterprise, and that makes recovery that much more challenging. So we need to invest in a concept of time capsule, take our most sensitive data and separate it at intervals from our core network and use that as a primary backup capability in the event of a data destruction event, specifically from ransomware. It's not elegant, but it will give more confidence to the enterprise to recover. Cyber resilience is the ability to respond to an incident and recover with minimal business impact. And that's as good as it's ever going to get.
Dan, question to you as we get close to the end here, or close to the Q&A forecast. Like, if you look out 5 years from now, you've got these macro trends that are having mass scale outsourcing of systems and services and so forth, and increasing threats. What's your forecast on the threat side and on the control side? Where are we going to be?
It's interesting. I think the threat side, there's really a ground game we've got to invest in. And internally, what are those threats? Natural threats, technology threats, human threats, and start rating those in terms of likelihood, and then start spilling that into what we do with vendor and risk management. And the challenge there now is, can we develop this and mature how we rate and assess vendors? And so that's what I'm hoping is we can continue to gather data and start to kind of distill and curate a trend line over time with vendors. How have they done? How have they been doing? And do we all get a common story from vendors? And I think that's a frustrating thing. 3 or 4 years ago, any one of us would say that they asked a vendor for something and the vendor claimed, well, you're the first CISO in the history of CISOs to ever ask me for this. And in your mind, you're like, these guys are full of baloney, right? And it still happens sometimes, but I think we need to start, with our business. So to me, in 5 years, it looks like the business now has control. They want to know who's providing what's the business impact of it. And then at a CISO level, hopefully we're now stewards of that. We're identifying risk to the business. They're helping us decide what to manage. We're managing it. And we need the tools to give them input. And some of these tools are, curated data about an organization's risk posture on the internet. curated information about assessments that have been done. And I think we'll get there, and it's probably going to take every single day of those 5 years to do it. But I do see a light at the end of the tunnel. And then, Jim made an interesting point about this diversity of capability within health systems.
Yeah.
We've got to make as much as possible that information affordable and accessible to all of us equally. And because we really do still have, a big chunk of us who just, are struggling with that big, diverse chunk of technology and how we do standards for supporting and securing it. And so that's, I hope, that 5 years from now, all of us have, access to what we need about our suppliers to do this better.
Yeah. Jim, last question to you before we go to Q&A. Final advice, insights that you want to share?
2 points. One related to the attack surface in 5 years. I was talking to a colleague of mine that I worked with 15 years ago. He started several very successful cybersecurity companies. And he said, there's this notion that you can solve for cybersecurity in an enterprise. I'm not sure where that notion comes from, but if you think of criminal activity and you think of the history of mankind or humankind, we've always had crime. So I'm pretty certain, Kelly, in 5 years we're going to have crime, and that means cybercrime. Cyber is just a vehicle for criminal activity. Criminal activity is part of the fabric of society, whether we want to acknowledge it or not. We will be fighting cybercrime in 5 years. The second point relative to how we as enterprises get prepared to fight cybercrime that we know that's going to be there in 5 years, we have to use data science as a foundation for cybersecurity capability and basically use data using models that drive behavioral attributes to create deviation on the behavior that triggers automation all in milliseconds in a concept called model-driven security. It means that we in cybersecurity have to invest in understanding data science foundations and fundamentals, and we need to teach cybersecurity professionals data science while we actively recruit data scientists and teach them cybersecurity. That is going to be absolutely essential to the enterprise in 5 years.
Excellent. And Jim, I know that in your enterprise and at MassMutual, for example, data science was a core strategic capability that you invested in heavily, and you're leading the way in that. All right. Well, there's time for a few questions, and if our friends at the HISAC want to interject those that may have come in, I've already gotten a couple just through side channel here. First one is organizationally. Are organizations structured right? Is there enough collaboration happening right now? And are we organized properly to really get close to the business and understand that on the scale that we need to? So I'll just throw that out to whoever wants to take it.
Well, step number one is we're not outside of the business. Cybersecurity is part of the business. We may have started our careers in cybersecurity a long time ago where it was considered outside of the business, not today. Digital consumers do not think cybersecurity is an add-on that's separate and distinct from the business or the core products and services that are offered in the marketplace. Cybersecurity is integral to that. And so we have to think like business people. CISOs have to be designing controls for the DevOps pipeline front and center as a member of that team, of the DevOps teams. And we have to use that as a vehicle to influence business decisions and be part of the business decision-making process. The more that enterprises spend on cybersecurity, the more the visibility is increasing, and the more there's an opportunity to do just that. So we can't think of us versus them. We have to think of us.
Keith and Dan, related to that, and it's something that's just kind of pivoting off of this first question. See, it seems to me that business continuity and disaster recovery teams have a pretty good sense of some supply chain and that there's an opportunity there. Is that something that you're heavily leveraging in your work at Pfizer and then also at Centera? Is there tight collaboration between those teams to understand what it takes for the business to be resilient?
Yeah, there's a lot of change there, and to the points that my colleagues have made, training is there, both IT learning the business and the business learning about cybersecurity. I see maturity really comes when you start seeing gentlemen like myself sitting on the risk management councils, committees of the business. Our contract management office and us have gotten extremely close, and it's been a resounding success to look at those third parties, fourth parties, et cetera, and whether it be we producing or those that are producing on our behalf for other products, having a close view into that and visibility, critical to the business. It's changing the way the business is thinking, and it's teaching us a tremendous amount of things we can use on other things that we're evaluating.
Maybe just adding on to Keith's point, I really like, what he was mentioning there, and for us as well. It's looking hard at what that supplier does for us, and then normalizing contractual language about what our expectations are for cybersecurity and cyber resilience. And then any organization that for some reason won't sign on to our language, they are going to be under spotlight. Everyone's going to know who's not able or willing to comply with that. And I think that will be a continuous driver for improvement.
Okay. One more question we've got. Any opinions, thoughts on the executive orders that we're seeing coming out rapidly from the Biden administration as it relates to, seems to be targeting supply chain risk?
Positive step forward and a fundamental shift and change from the past administration. So it should be, viewed positively. Having said that, there are a number of people that have told me here at the conference at the summit that it's not enough detail. And my perspective is this is pretty normal for executive orders. The direction that is being sent, as a message, is valuable to the both enterprises as well as to the federal sector and to all of us as a nation. So positive step forward. Certainly more to come, more opportunity to come. But fundamentally, if we can shift the balance of investment towards protection of our extensive attack surface as a nation versus creating offensive capability that may actually benefit other nation states downstream, I think we'll be heading in the right direction.
Yeah, along with what Jim said, I think it's a great thing, the sign of support and engagement, those written orders. But at the end of the day, it comes back to us, because just words are words, spoken or written. At the end of the day, there's still a lot of work we have to do to protect things. And the point about criminal activity has always existed, and that's the way it is. We still have to show up and take action.
Yeah, I certainly agree with the colleagues. I think it's an excellent step. My concern is that legacy production is designed for a totally different life cycle than what we all operate and deal with. And because of that, are the vendors that we really need to step up even in existence? Or at all financially capable of being in existence to help us. So it's going to be a challenging thing. The devil's in the details, but it is absolutely the first step to a new road, which hopefully we can all pave together.
Awesome. Well, hey, this has been a lot of fun. Thank you for taking the time to share your thoughts and advice. And thank you for all your great work. And take care. Thank you.
Guys.
Thank you.